Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Molly. I'm a mum here in the UK of 2 kiddos. My husband and I have a little girl who is biologically ours, and more recently we adopted our son through the UK adoption process. I wanted to talk about adoption after baby loss, and specifically the experience that me and my husband had in choosing adoption, what motivated us to choose adoption, and how the adoption process was impacted by the fact that we had suffered miscarriages in the past. I do just want to put a bit of a trigger warning out there that I will be talking about pregnancy, miscarriage, potential infertility. If anybody does struggle with that, please don't feel like you have to watch this video, but the content will be talking about that quite a lot. So a little bit about me and my husband's story. We had my daughter in 2016 through a natural conception, natural pregnancy. Prior to having my daughter, I had suffered from 2 missed miscarriages at around the 12-week mark both times. And this was an incredibly devastating experience. I can still remember the feeling that I felt laid on the ultrasound table and the ultrasound technician telling us that there was no heartbeat both times. Something that I really did struggle with for a long time until we had my daughter. Anybody who has suffered from baby loss or miscarriage, anything like that, will know how heartbreaking and how difficult a future pregnancy can be. I can hand on heart say that I did not at all enjoy the experience of being pregnant with my daughter, which is really sad. But I think throughout the 9 months, I just set myself up very much to lose her again, which meant that I didn't even let myself bond with her. And that is one of the saddest things ever, saying that back. I registered that I really wasn't pregnant. I didn't let myself think about it. I didn't really let myself get excited. When we got to the hospital to have my daughter, I'd had a lot of bleeding in the pregnancy. There were some complications with my bloods, and we were at a wedding. I started bleeding. We dashed out of the wedding 3 weeks before my due date to a hospital that was not the hospital I was supposed to give birth at. And I was induced there and then, and ended up having quite a traumatic birth. I had an emergency C-section. When I had to have an emergency C-section, that in that moment for me just clarified all of the preparation I had done. I remember laying on the bed and doctors and nurses running around and everything kicking off, and me just thinking, right, Molly, this is what we've been preparing for. You can do this. That is the saddest thing for me to think about, because when she was here, I knew that she was mine and she was our baby because I'd not let myself bond. I'd not let myself attach to her in any way. And even when she was here, I was still petrified of losing her. It meant that I had really quite bad baby blues and really did struggle to build an attachment with her for quite some time. And this is a very normal thing. Postnatally and postnatal depression, it's all very normal. And looking back, I didn't even know I had it until about 18 months after my little girl was born. I did not want to do this again. It was a bit like PTSD. I think I went into a hospital, I saw a needle, somebody else got pregnant, and I just had that sicky, stomach flipping feeling inside that took me back to those awful times. After having my daughter, my husband and I knew that we would probably want a sibling for her at some point. Adoption hadn't really come up in conversation too much, but my husband did mention it in conversation after we had my daughter. I was very open about me never wanting to go through that again, not wanting to be pregnant, and he did say, you know, Mol, it's fine, there's other options out there like adoption, you know, there's plenty of things we can do, you don't have to be pregnant again. And that was kind of left on the back burner until a few years later, when our little girl started expressing interest in having a sibling. All of her friends at nursery and preschool were having baby siblings, and of course she then started asking questions about where hers was, where the baby mummy's tummy was, and this is where myself and my husband really had to think about what we wanted to do. It was actually around this time when she started expressing interest in having a sibling that I unexpectedly suffered from a chemical pregnancy. And this is basically the way I was told by the GP. It's an incredibly early miscarriage. And when I say early, it was literally 2 days after I had found out that I was pregnant. You know, any miscarriage is devastating for anybody, regardless of how far along you are. For me, I dealt with this one very differently, and I'm going to be very honest here when I say that because I had my daughter, she acted like the medicine that I needed. She completely healed me from my previous miscarriages, and because I had her, I grieved this loss very, very differently. It didn't take me as long to grieve it. I didn't really need much time off work, and emotionally I flipped back into myself quite quickly in comparison to before. However, having had a chemical pregnancy, it completely took me back to feeling those horrible feelings of loss and trauma that I experienced with the miscarriages and the pregnancy and the birth of my daughter. And it really reinstilled the fact that I did not want to have any more biological children. Because by this point, a chemical pregnancy was classed as a miscarriage, I had had 3 miscarriages. So our doctor did actually say, do you want some testing done? Let's do your bloods. And then if they seem a bit iffy, we'll send you off to the local hospital specialising in fertility. So I did have the bloods done just because I was curious if it was something from my thyroid, or if it was something like progesterone, for example, that I actually wanted to sort out regardless of whether I was going on to have biological children or not. And I knew that after I had my bloods done and they were absolutely fine, that I didn't want to go to this hospital and have these tests. I had been told by the GP that they honestly just thought it was bad luck, and that because I had a very good pregnancy and a natural pregnancy and conception with my daughter, that they didn't really think I would have any fertility issues, but they wanted to send me just in case. Feeling in my gut was an absolute no. I didn't want to go. I felt sick about it. And that is how I knew that me having more biological children really had come the end of the road for me. I knew then that that feeling wasn't right. And I was also worried that I had a very observant 3-year-old who was starting to pick up on mummy and daddy's emotions, and I didn't want it to impact her either. And my husband and I discussed this for quite some time before deciding that we would look into adoption properly. So I began researching, I began collecting information packs from different agencies, and when we went to our agency's information evening, I can honestly say that this is probably one of the most pivotal parts of my own journey in having children, biologically and adopted, because I remember coming out of that agency absolutely euphoric. I remember coming out feeling like a new woman. The weight had been lifted off my shoulders because I knew that me and my husband could become parents again. My daughter could have a sibling and we could expand our family without there being any pressure on me and my body. There didn't have to be any needles or hospitals, and it was just something so much more positive than what we had previously experienced, and that is what I craved. After this information evening, me and my husband had long chats about adoption. My husband had always worked with children, primarily in early years and primary schools, but he's also worked with a lot of older children in care. So in comparison to my complete lack of experience of working with children full stop, he had a very realistic idea of some of the challenges that come with adoption. So whilst I was all euphoric and, let's do this now, he really wanted to just take some time to mull it over and suggested that let's have this pre-registration interview, which I've talked about more in my UK adoption process video. He said, let's have another chat and let's see how we feel. And in the end, we were both very, very confident that this is something that we wanted. We felt very reassured by our social worker. We both felt that this would be a really, really positive change to all of the negativity that we'd endured having our little girl and trying to expand our family. I do just want to point out that whilst I am saying it was so positive for us, it is a wonderful thing to adopt and bring children home, but adoption is hit by an incredible amount of loss for the children, for foster carers, for birth family. For you, in a sense, as an adoptive parent, you have to grieve the fact that you will never, ever be their biological parent. And it's tough. It's still very intense. And when I say it was positive, for me, I mean, the journey was incredibly positive in comparison to our pregnancies. It was certainly hard. The training for adoption was hard. The things that you have to learn about and read about and know about is heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking, and something that me and my husband never even really registered before we'd got to that point in the process. So that is how we decided to adopt. That's why we decided we didn't want any more biological children, and that's how we said yes to adopting. I do want to touch upon how the adoption process was impacted by the fact that we had previously suffered with baby loss, because it did shift a little bit of the process for us. So on average, an agency or a local authority will say that if you've had a miscarriage or any form of baby loss, if you've had a diagnosis of infertility or you've had an IVF failure, for example, you normally need about 6 months between that point and starting the adoption process, and that is so that you've had an adequate amount of time to grieve. Now, this is completely different for every circumstance. For us specifically, we did not have that amount of time between me having that last chemical pregnancy and deciding to adopt. But because we had discussed this in length with our adoption social worker, we had spoken very openly and honestly about how we had grieved that, how we had processed the fact that we weren't going to have any more biological children, and the fact that we had also discussed it with our GPs in the adoption medical. They were very, very confident that we were in the right emotional space to move forward with adoption. Throughout the adoption assessment process, our social worker, as part of our assessment appointments, would speak at length about how it affected us medically, how it affected our relationship, how it impacted our views on adoption, how we feel about close family and friends becoming pregnant, if there's any jealousy there. And so we had to be very open and honest, and it was incredibly, incredibly grueling to have to repeat and talk about this constantly. It's all part of the process, and they have a professional duty to ensure that you are 100% committed to adoption. The last thing that a local authority wants is for an adoptive parent to resent their child because they're not biologically theirs. So it is incredibly important that you have grieved it, you've had some self-care, you've accessed some support or some professional help if you need that before deciding to adopt. Like I just said, in our GP adoption medicals, our doctors did raise this as well. Whilst it wasn't necessarily on my husband's medical notes, it was a conversation that they had. But for me personally, it was discussed at length with my GP. They had to give a professional opinion on whether or not they think I had processed my grief and that they think I would be capable emotionally and mentally to adopt. And this was then also flagged up by our agency medical advisor, who then reads the GP's adoption medical and feeds that back to the agency. So the agency medical advisor did feedback that it had not been 6 months from my chemical pregnancy to us starting the adoption process, and just to follow that up through the standard agency protocol. It is something that our social worker also discussed with our referees. So in my UK adoption assessment process video, I talk about referees. We had 3 referees. We had 1 family member, 2 close mutual friends, and I believe it was asked about in all 3. It was definitely asked about in the 2 mutual friends ones at length, because they were very close friends to me, and they had obviously witnessed me go through a few of these things and had seen how we'd handled it as a couple and as a family. So our social worker wanted to gain some external perspective on that, just to be extra confident that we had the support that we needed and that, again, we were in the right place to move forward with adoption. I just want to finish this video by saying that one of the misconceptions about adoption is that it tends to be a last resort for people, and this is something that when we told people we were adopting, they were incredibly shocked by. Because we have a biological child, why could we possibly need or want to adopt? It shows complete strength that you have had to grieve loss, whether that's loss of a child or a baby, or loss of the fact that you won't have biological children. That is such a hard process to go through, and to grieve that and close that door and move to adoption is such a big decision that it is a choice. It is still a choice. Adoption is not a last resort. And I wanted to end on that because I know that a lot of people do come to adoption through baby loss. It is society's perception that if you adopt, you are infertile. And even if you are, you know, you have made this choice to parent a child that has had such a difficult life already and take on a lot more challenges than you normally would have, but having children biologically. And if that does apply to anybody, I just want to say well done for getting through that, and well done for choosing adoption and getting to that point, because I know it won't have been easy. I know it will have taken a hell of a lot of courage, a hell of a lot of heartbreak to get there, and your social worker, your agency, or local authority, and everybody in the UK adoption community recognises that and completely values that. I hope that video has been helpful to some of you. I get a lot of questions about baby loss and how that impacted our adoption experience over on Instagram. So if you do have any more questions, please just find me on there or comment down below. I will happily discuss more about our experience. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos about adoption and adoption with baby loss and having adopted child, being a family of 4. I will be uploading much more content whilst I am making the most of my leave. Thank you for watching, guys. Bye!